Mosquitoes. Hi everyone. So we're here on location in Round Valley Regional Park here in Contra Costa County, California, and I picked this location for this video specifically because this area that we're looking at right now in this scene has a really nice depth of field. So you can see from here all the way, this should be about where things start to get clear. I have the lens set at f8 out to infinity. It has a nice deep range. And what we're going to talk about a little bit right here, I have no idea what that animal is. I cannot figure out what's making that crazy whooping noise. Anyway, you might not even be able to hear it. So what we're going to talk about today are telephoto lenses. Okay, so here's this telephoto lens. This is my standard telephoto lens. It's a 400mm Tokina, Vivitar brand, but Tokina made. And I have a couple of things here with it that are necessities for telephoto photography. And here we have, it should be about in focus right about here. This is a set of M42 macro tubes. This is actually an M42 lens with an adapter on it. And I hope you're getting this all in frame because I have no idea. I can't see the back of the camera for a change. A little bit out of my depth here. But here's a set of M42 macro tubes. And this is a doubler in a leather case. But there's a doubler inside of that. So, the reason that I picked all of these to bring out here today, what we're going to do is I'm going to put this lens on the camera in just a minute, and we're going to see what it looks like just by itself, and taking a picture of something far away, just the lens. Then I'm going to put then I'm going to put the doubler on, and we'll see what it looks like when this becomes an 800mm lens. And we'll talk a little bit about the image quality loss and some other issues with doublers then. And then I'm going to put the macro tubes on, and we'll see what this does to affect the image. And what I'll tell you is anytime you take a telephoto out with you, the macro tubes and the doubler, absolutely a must-have accessory, or two must-have accessories, because they're going to really expand the capabilities of the telephoto lens when you're using it in the field. So, let's put this on the camera and see what happens. Okay, so here this is the 400mm lens put onto the K7, and we're just looking at the road that goes along the hillside that was way in the background of what we were just looking at. Now, the previous lens I had on there was a 31mm, so on this crop sensor it functions approximately like a standard, like a 50-ish millimeter lens. With the 400 on the crop sensor, what happens is you get the same field of view as a 600mm lens. So if you have a full-frame sensor camera or a standard film 35mm camera, this field of view that you're seeing right now, you would have to have a 600mm lens to see normally. So for telephoto work, a crop sensor camera is really a great option. So nature photographers take note of that. So what we're seeing here is almost at infinity focus. Many telephotos focus a little bit past infinity, especially ones that were the same model made for different camera systems, like the Tokinas and the Tamrons and Sun Optics, things like that. And so anyway, so this is what it looks like with 400. I'm going to come back in just a second. I'm going to put the doubler on, and we'll see what it looks like with an 800mm lens on the front of this camera. And then we'll come back and take a look at it with macro tubes. So think of your predictions about what's going to happen when we do each of those. The doubler should be pretty simple to figure out. It's going to double, and we're going to see less of the image. The macro tubes are more interesting. So take a guess right now, and let's see if you're right when we get back. Okay, so this is what it looks like with the doubler on. And you'll see that there's a really tiny frame field of view here. In 35mm terms, this is the field of view seen with a 1200mm lens. So we're talking about super telephoto distance. That car that's passing right now, I'm going to eyeball it and suggest that that's about 1.5 to 2 miles away. I'll double check that on the maps, and then I'll put a comment in there with the actual distance when I get home. But I think that's probably about right. Now, So what the doubler does, and the way that it functions, is that it takes the available light coming through the camera, and then it takes the centermost part of that, the center area, and expands that to fill the frame, the sensor or the film frame. And that's not the most technical definition, and might not even be the most accurate, but the principle's probably not that far off. And so there's a downside to doing that. The first video that you saw was shot at f8. I opened this lens up all the way to f6.3 because a doubler cuts the available light in half, and it also increases your f-stop. So at f8, let's switch to f8 right now, what happens is it just sees the world as though it were through an f16 aperture. And so I lowered it to f6.3 because that gives me an aperture of about, let's call it f13, just to be on this, well, I don't know exactly, but f13, we'll call it that. So you cut the available light in half, and you get magnification. Now, there are other problems, too, because you're introducing another optical element in the path of the light. This doubler that I'm using right now, it's the best one that I have in M42, but it also introduces serious purple fringing and other chromatic aberrations, coma, and things like that when pixel peeping that the lens by itself does not have. This lens is incredibly sharp and free of things like coma and other chromatic aberrations. Once in a while it gets a little bit of green fringing when there's dramatic contrast. So understand when you use a doubler, you're going to get that. So with a doubler, you will need to make sure you're not cropping your picture, because if you crop your picture, it's going to effectively enlarge it and amplify errors. Doublers also reduce the effective lines per millimeter that hit the frame because it's taking a small portion of the image and increasing it to the full size. So you're going to get some softness. Also, doubler optics can introduce softness themselves if they aren't of the same quality as your lens. Some lenses some telephotos include, or you can purchase, doublers and teleconverters at 1.4, sometimes even triplers, that are designed and made by the manufacturer to complement those telephoto lenses. And that's the best scenario if you need a teleconverter or want one to do something like long distance or nature photography. One other thing, if you're using a telephoto lens with or without a teleconverter, and you've got it set at infinity all the time, you're using it wrong. And telephoto lenses are really at their best from slightly past the minimum focal distance out to before infinity. So with this lens that I use, the minimum focal distance is 25 feet out to infinity, and it really is at its sweet spot from 35 or 40 feet out to about 200 to 250. And it really does a good job of bringing subjects into frame and into the image at those ranges. So now I'm going to turn off the camera here again. I'm going to put on the macro tubes, and we're going to take a look at what happens. All right, in a few seconds I'm going to take the lens cap off. So get your last predictions in about the macro tubes in 3, 2, 1, now. And, well, that's curious. There's a whole bunch of nothing in focus. So I'm going to freehand this camera here for a minute. And I'm set at infinity focus. And oh, here we go. There's something. Oh, okay. It's some leaves and grass. And at infinity, with all three of the macro tubes on, that's about that's where I was standing when I was talking earlier. And here we go. I'm cycling up through the focal range up to the closest focus distance. Getting closer, grass, lots of grass in the trail, and grass on the trail. And some jelly effect. And that's as close as we can focus. That is about 6 feet in front of me. So what happened with this, with the camera, with the macro tubes, was that it made the focal range much closer. And that's not quite life size, but it's getting pretty close. That would be probably about a 1/3, 1/4 life size magnification, which is pretty good. So carrying some macro tubes around with you when you use your when you take your telephoto lenses out with you, whether it's a 150, a 200, 300, 400, 500, whatever it may be, will allow you to take some very good close-up shots from a fairly good distance. And that's useful if you're out in some place where you see a lizard or a bird or something like that that's close enough that you can take a good shot of it without spooking it if you had a telephoto that just focused slightly closer. So what we've seen is that the macro tubes allow me, the set that I have, to go from having a 25-foot minimum focusing distance to, let's call it 7 feet. Now, if I had a second set of macro tubes, it would be even more. You could carry a macro bellows with you when you're hiking, but those are heavy and cumbersome, can be difficult to use. Well, they're heavier than macro tubes, and they can be difficult to use and are much less stable than just putting a tripod support on your lens like I do, and some macro tubes between it and the camera. So that's my telephoto tips and tricks video. If you guys have any comments or questions, please leave them in the section below. If this video was helpful, give me a thumbs up. I'd give you a thumbs up right now, but it would just look blurry. If you want to subscribe to my channel, you can do that too, and you'll be notified whenever I have a new video that comes out, whether it's about photography or not. And lastly, I wanted to say thank you guys for watching.